Okay. Welcome everyone to Garden of the Spirit class, studying apples from the orchard for the second time, beginning after Pesach 2014. This class meets in Long Meadow, Massachusetts, the center of the universe, and is held in memory of Malka Ruth Bas Moshe, Margaret Vogel of blessed memory. Apples in the Orchard contains selections of teachings of Kabbalah from the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, based on the weekly Torah portion, superbly translated and explained by Rabbi Moshe Wisniewski. Okay. We are up to Yitro, chapter 3, page 376. Okay. I can hear you guys. When Yaakov was born, his parents named him Yaakov, which means heel. When he returned to Israel after 20 years in Haran, at the age of 97, Hashem named him Yisrael, which means nobility of God. Yaakov transformed himself by living with Lavan and not lowering his own standards, and thus earned a new title for himself. You know, very quickly, when you live with a creep or a jerk, it's very difficult not to get back at him, not to act like a creep or a jerk back. So Yaakov did not do that. He always held himself to the highest standards. In this chapter, the Arizal notes the difference between Yaakov and Yisrael in terms of Kabbalah. Hashem began his words to Moshe regarding receiving the Torah with a statement, "So shall you say to the house of Yaakov and declare to the children of Israel." What is the difference between Yaakov and Yisrael? And how does say, Amar, align with Yaakov and declare, Taged, with Yisrael? Okay, so shall you say to the house of Yaakov and declare, I'm doing some bad thing, to the children of Israel. Why? What's the difference between Yaakov and Yisrael that it changes in the middle of midstream, middle of a pasuk? Why is house used only with Yaakov and not with Yisrael? It doesn't say the house of Israel. Rashi explains that house of Yaakov refers to women. Say refers to speech that's gentle. So Yisrael refers to the men. And declare is speech that is more rough and is similar to the Hebrew word for wormwood, which is bitter. In other words, speak gently to the women and rough to the men. Should be roughly. No? If it modifies speak, then it's roughly. If it just modifies, well, rougher, yeah, but here, roughly to the men. Okay. All right, Alan, you're on.
Moshe ascended Har Sinai to Hashem, and Hashem called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus shall you say to the house of Yaakov and declare to the Israelites, you have seen what I did to Mitzrayim, and that I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. So now if you listen to my voice and keep my covenant, you will be for me a treasure from among all the nations, for the whole earth is mine, and you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This is what you should say to the Israelites." The sages explain the distinction between saying to the house of Yaakov on the one hand and declaring to the Israelites on the other. Saying is a softer means of expression than declaring, and the house of Yaakov refers to the women, while the Israelites refers to the men.
Now, Malchus, Nukva, is the feminine component of the Sfirot. It's the 10th of the Sfirot. Malchus is where the earlier 9 Sfirot are expressed to the next stage of creation. So Malchus of Atzilus expresses Atzilus and transfers to how Atzilus is expressed through Malchus to the next level, to the next stage of creation, Bria. And Malchus of Bria is where the spheres of Bria are expressed to the next stage of creation, Yetzira, and so on. This is compared to the mouth, where speech expresses what is in a person's mind. In Pasach Eliyahu, that we read Friday before Mincha, it says Malchus, the mouth, which we call the oral Torah. And next, there are 5 points in the mouth from where sound is produced. Aleph, Hey, Ches, Ayin, or Achaha, from the throat. Yichak, Gimel, Yud, Chaf, Kuf, from the palate. Bumaf, Beis, Vav, Mempe, from the lips. Datlant, Dalid, Tes, Lamed, Nun, Taf, from the tongue. And Zayin, Samach, Shin, Reish, Sadi, from the teeth. And that's incidental. It doesn't seem to be essential to our discussion here, but it is mentioned.
Know that saying applies to Nukva, for she is like the mouth, which includes all the 5 origins of speech. She expresses them outward. As we have seen previously, the partsuf of Nukva, or Malchus, is the means of expression for the emotions that constitute Zeranpin. The mouth comprises 5 parts that are used to articulate the letters of speech: the throat, the lips, the tongue, the palate, and the teeth. The mouth, as an entity, expresses or articulates the letters produced by these 5 origins outward.
Okay. The main point here is that speech and the word, or to say, the word amar corresponds to malchus, which corresponds to the feminine component. Okay. Nukva is malchus, the feminine component of the emotions, the 7 lower spheres. So just a reminder that we have 10 spheres. The first 3 are intellect, the ones that we use our minds for, and the next 7 are emotions, feelings. The first 3 are in the head. The next 7 are in the torso. Malchus is the 10th of the spheres. So it is the feminine component of the emotions of the lower 7. Numbers 4 to 9, the 7 spheres from 4 to 9 are the male parts of the emotion, the male component, which we're going to call Ze'er Anpin. And the 10th, the last, is Nukva, is the female component. There's also a feminine component of the intellect of the first 3, which is Ima or Bina. Ima, of course, means mother. Bina, understand, usually translated as understanding. Ima is also feminine in component because it takes concepts from Abba and develops them, much as a fetus develops in the womb.
Similarly, Ima receives the seminal drop from Abba and expresses it outward. in the form of the Torah. Ima is the higher feminine principle. She takes the seminal divine insight, Hashem's desire to have a home in the lower worlds, and develops this into the Torah in her womb.
Thank you.
Wow.
At the beginning, you want to say something?
Just wow.
Okay.
That's a big deal.
You've never heard that before?
No.
Okay. I just thought of it today when I was writing this.
Yes.
But I've probably seen it once or twice or a few dozen. At the beginning of Mishlei, it says, the Proverbs of Shlomo, son of David, king of Israel. To know words of wisdom and reproof, to understand words of understanding. To know, ladas, wisdom, chachma, says ladas, chachma, umusar. To know words of wisdom and reproof. We're going to look at to know and wisdom. Meaning, can mean to transfer chachma to bina. Huh? Okay, let's get this. So we have chachma there, which we translate wisdom. There is no bina here at the beginning. However, there was the word to know. The word to know, ladas, is used by the Torah to say that Adam was intimate with Chava Vayeda. Adam knew Eve, his wife. Vayeda Adam Asishta. So the word yada Vayeda ladas, to know, knowledge, means is used in the Torah to mean intimacy or carnal knowledge. Get it? Knowledge. It's right there in English. Interaction between Chachma and Bina is described as a process of gamogenesis, similar to the interaction of intimacy between male and female. So when it says in Mishlei, ladas, Chachma, it means to, did I write this? No. It means to make that connection between Chachma, the male component of intellect, and Bina, the female component of intellect. Okay. Go ahead, next one.
This is the meaning of the verse, to know wisdom and reproof. To know refers to the seminal drop of Abba, as in the phrase, and Adam knew Eve, his wife, referring to the seminal drop that comes from Abba. The phrase to know, das, wisdom, chachma, refers to the process by which chachma is transferred into bina. To know in this sense is taken as a transitive verb. Thus, Adam knew Eve means Adam transferred the seminal drop into Eve.
Okay, thanks.
I'd have to say Adam knew Eve, his wife. There was no other Chava. That was it.
The question is, why is it add his wife?
Yeah.
Don't know. Don't know. It's a good question. I don't have the answer on the tip of my fingers.
Means you're supposed to know your wife.
Who?
You're supposed to only know your wife,
Who's that?
the
Oh,
husband.
only. It's teaching you only to know your wife. Okay. I meant you're supposed to know your wife. Like, do you really know? Okay.
No, in terms of das, your wife.
Yeah.
That type of no.
Understanding.
Deep connection.
We did speak about this way earlier. We talked about being an intellectual, having a strong intellectual relationship with your wife, husband and wife. The relationship works best when you begin with an intellectual relationship, and then that moves on to a more emotional and physical relationship.
That doesn't match the way that religious people date. Does it?
I'm not going to disagree, but what I will say is there's something close. I've said for many years that when that marriage, a good marriage is based on shared values.
Yeah.
And your values, I guess, come from what you understand to be right. So if you share your values, and also you mentioned religious people, there are many different ways that religious people date and meet,
Yeah,
right? There's a lot of different groups. So the end of the pasuk in Mishlei, to understand sayings of understanding, associates sayings, imre, with bina. And that's what we said before. As we said, say is associated with the feminine, in this case, malchus of the emotions, bina of the intellect, both being forms of expression. So here it says, to understand sayings of understanding, it has sayings, imre, with understanding, bina. Did I write the pasuk above? I did not write it in Hebrew, I think. No. Ladas. No. Ladas chachma o musar. Ladas chachma musar le lahavin imre bina. I think lahavin imre bina. Sayings of understanding. Okay, we're gonna Jim. Go ahead. Middle of 377.
Verse continues, to understand sayings of understanding. Here we see that saying is associated with bina. This being in accord with the sage's statement quoted above, that saying is associated with the feminine.
Okay, thank you. Now, from here on, it was hard to figure out. I got most of it. I think there's a few things that I'm still not clear about. I may even have written it wrong and didn't have a chance to go back and correct it. In Yesod, so we had Chachma and Bina. Chachma, we said, is connected. We did say that Chachma. Okay, that when Moshe spoke to Yaakov, or the house of Yaakov, he was talking to the women, and he spoke, and Hashem told him to speak to the men. It calls them Yisrael. Now, in Yesod of Ima are states of Chesed and Gevura. So this is within Bina. The states of Chesed are transferred to Ze'er Anpin, which is the male component of the emotions, and the states of Gevura are transferred to Nukva, the female component of emotions. We've had before that there are states of Gevura within Malchus that need to be sweetened or tempered. Gevura doesn't mean aggressive in the sense that we understand it, necessarily in a negative way, severity, judgment. Gevura, as we said, provides structure. And in Torah, it refers to analysis of Torah and building parameters for the halacha, when the law applies, when the law does not apply. And the studying of Torah, analyzing the Torah, the halacha, these are all forms of gevura. So we said that determining that this case would be kosher, and this case would not be kosher. So the states, again, this from Ima, the states of Chesed are transferred to Zeir Anpin, and the states of Gvura are transferred to Nukva. So think of it as a Chachma and Bina as parents, a father and mother, who produce offspring. And how does that happen? The father injects or implants the seed within the mother. Within the mother, the seed and goes into a fetus. The fetus is developed. In human case, it's 9 months, long time, and then the offspring is produced. So here too, the intellect, Chachma and Bina, produce the offspring, meaning the emotions, the 6 spheres of Zeir Anpin, and then the 10th of the spheres, the female one, Nukva. So according to this, there's no direct line from Abba to the offspring. Abba pervades to Ima, then Ima develops and provides or purveys to the emotions. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Now it is known there are states of Chesed and Gevurah within the Yesod of Ima. The states of Chesed are transferred to Zeir Anpin, the states of Gevurah Nukva. Zeir Anpin is constructed out of the Chesed aspect of Ima, while Nukva is constructed out of the Gevurah aspects of Ima. All the emotions are, in a sense, variations of Chesed, because Chesed, in its most basic meaning, is simply concern. And even the emotion of Gevurah, fear or anger, is also a form of concern. A person does not generally get so angry over the behavior of someone he or she does not care about. Nukva is constructed out of the Gevurah aspects of Ima because Nukva is the expression of the emotions, and expressing an emotion is an act of limiting, of compressing the emotion into a specific form or venue of expression.
Okay, thanks. 9. Ima, as we said, is like a mother that develops the fetus. That is, it produces the emotions, Zeir Anpin and Nukva. Abba, on the other hand, only interacts with Ima, not with the emotions. While Abba contains states of Chesed and Gvura like Ima, it does not transfer them to the offspring or to the emotions. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
The Yesod of Abba also contains states of Chesed and states of Gevurah, but neither reach Zeir Anpin or Nukva at all. Abba, the abstract intellect of original insight, is not what gives rise to emotion, Zeir Anpin, or expression.
Okay, so there are a few things that, whatever, we find a little confusing, we'll do our best. Within Zeir Anpin, the male component, there are 2 sub-partsufim. Again, partsufim are, from what I understand in simple terms, are describing the spheres in human terms. So Chachma is called Abba, Bina is called Ima, the 6 spheres are called Zeir Anpin, the minor profile, and then the 10th sphere of Malchus is called Nukva. We refer to it as partsufim, which means profiles. This is the best that I understand them. So within Zeir Anpin are 2 sub-partsufim. One is called Yisrael. One is called Leah. In other words, Yisrael is the male of Zeir Anpin, the male. Leah is the female of Zeir Anpin, the male. That's within Zeir Anpin. We have Yisrael The male part is called Yisrael. The female part is called the male sub partsuf is called Yisrael. The female sub partsuf is called Leah. Within Nukva, the female component, are also two sub partsufim. One is called Yaakov, and one is called Rachel. Yaakov is the male of the female of Nukva, and Rachel is the female of the female of Nukva. Okay, is this clear to everyone?
One thing, Zerampin, but Zerampin is a bunch of Sephiros, correct?
Yes.
So are we talking sub-parsufin of a particular Sephira, or?
That's a good question, thank you. The Ze'er Anpin, when we talk about Partsufim, when we look at it in the perspective of Partsuf, then the 6 spheres are one entity.
Okay.
Called Ze'er Anpin. Okay. Thank you for bringing it up. I never thought of it in that context. In an ideal situation, Yisrael, the male of Ze'er Anpin, the emotions, interacts with Rachel, the female of Nukva, of the emotions. That's in an ideal situation where things are running the ideal way, and the way they're meant to run. I mean, think about what we just said before, that Yaakov lived for 97 years of his life as Yaakov. And for 63 years, he lived at home. He lived at home, okay? Suppers, laundry, and so on and so forth. He studied Torah all day. He had no worries. Then 63 to 77, he studied in the yeshiva, which I was at in Sfat, and then I davened mincha there, and then from 77 to 97, for 20 years, he was in Haran by his uncle Lavan. And that's where he was thrown all those curveballs and sliders and sinkers. And he didn't strike out. He really rose above the situation that he was in. And an amazing challenge. And I think about this often, of how he did not react to Lavan in the same way that Lavan treated him. And through that he accomplished something he didn't accomplish for the first 77 years of his life, when he really had no challenge. And it was here that when he left, that Hashem awarded him with a new title. Hashem said, Yaakov doesn't fit you anymore. Now you deserve to be called Yisrael. You've earned a new station. So if you think about it, from Yaakov to Yisrael is moving in the right direction. We also had that Yaakov, he was at first, he was kind of interacting with what was above him, Leah. We said before that Leah represents Bina, or corresponds to Bina. Over here, we're saying that she corresponds to the Ze'er Anpin. Before she corresponds to Bina, and Yaakov was kind of attracted, not only attracted, but Leah was attracted to him, which is really out of order, because he's much lower. Leah's at Bina. It was when I guess at some point that he was interacting primarily with Rachel, and that is that's ideally how it's supposed to work. Yaakov or Yisrael in Ze'er Anpin interacting with Rachel from Nukva. I don't remember exactly how it fits in with what actually happened in the story, but in Kabbalistic terms, this is how we speak about it. Okay, so now let me see if we go into 11. Okay, Jim, go ahead. Rather Yaakov takes them all, and let me see.
Rather
Yaakov
Yaakov takes them all. and he gives the states of Gevurah to Nukva. Zer Anpin is generally identified with Jacob, Yaakov, who personified this partsif. However, in particular, Yaakov refers to the higher secondary partsif that develops out of Nukva together with Rachel, while Israel, Yaakov's other name, refers to the higher secondary partsif that develops out of Zer Anpin together with Leah.
Okay, so
So-
give me, yeah, so just be patient with this. I explained it also in number 11. So this isn't the end of the explanation. Jim, I want you to read across left to right.
Yeah,
So-
I will.
Okay,
So Keser, Atik Yomen, Ancient of Days, Atik Yomen, the male dimension of the Ancient of Days, and Nukva of Atik Yomen is the female dimension of the Ancient of Days. That's in the Keser, the inner form of Keser, making me call it. The outer form, Arak Ampin, the long face. Arak Ampin is the male dimension of the long face. Nukva of Arak Ampin is the female dimension of the long face. And then you have Chachma. Chachma, the parts of him, Abba, father, Abba, Ilya, supernal father, Ima, Ilya, supernal mother. Then in Bina, you have Ima, you have mother, and you have Israel Saba, which is Israel the elder, and Tuvuna, which is understanding. Then you have Midot, which is Zeranpin, which is the small face. And you have Israel, or Israel, and Leah. So Israel and Leah being from Zeranpin, the small face. And then from Malchus, you have Nukva of Zeranpin, the female Zeranpin, and you have Yaakov, which is Jacob, and Rachel, which is Rachel.
thank you. We are going to be living we're going to be focused on only 4 boxes. And that's in the column of secondary parsufim, the last 4. Yisrael, Leah, Yaakov, and Rachel.
Mhm.
That's what we're going to really, we have to give our attention to. Yisrael and Leah are within the Midos. Yisrael is the male component of Zeranpin, and Leah is the female component of Zeranpin. And Yaakov and Rachel, below that, Yaakov is the male component of Nukva, and Rachel is the female component of Nukva. Okay, now number 11. When the Jews were in the desert, the states of Chesed and Gvura from Ima went to Yaakov and Rachel, the male and female components of Nukva. Zer Anpin or Yisrael was bypassed. Again, I think we said before that typically from the Chesed, that we said the states of Chesed and Gvura from Bina go to Ze'er Anpin. The Chesed goes to Ze'er Anpin and the Gvura goes to Nukva. But what happened was when the Jews were in the desert, Ze'er Anpin was bypassed. And the states of Chesed and Gvura went to Yaakov and Rachel, which are the components which are within Nukva.
Right.
And if you look on the bottom in the chart, so Yisrael and Leah are bypassed, and instead it went to Yaakov and Rachel, or to Yaakov. Because ideally we're looking for Yisrael interacting with Rachel, but Yisrael got bypassed. This continued until Bnei Yisrael reached Eretz Yisrael, which corresponds to the level of Rachel. So they reached the land of Israel. It wasn't only that they physically reached the land, but spiritually they achieved that level of the land of Israel, or Rachel. Okay. Go ahead, Jim, from this was the state till the bottom of the page.
All right. So this was the state of the generation of the desert, we will now explain. In order for Zeranpin and Nukva to couple properly, their union must be permeated by the inspiration of Ima, which is divine consciousness. Without divine consciousness, their union is not conducted on the spiritual level, which is at which it's intended to be. So at the time of the generation of the desert, there was not yet any coupling for Zeranpin, that is between Israel, and Rachel. In the scheme of the secondary parts of him, Zeranpin is identified with his higher derivative, Israel, the higher name for Jacob. The intended mate for this higher aspect of Zeranpin is Rachel, which is the feminine of the feminine. In contrast, the lower aspect of Jacob, Yaakov, is the male of the female who mates with Leah, the female of the male.
All right. Now, thank you. In the desert, Yaakov, not Yisrael, interacted with Rachel. They both were associated with Gevura. In Yaakov's case, this Gevura came from Abba, not Ima. I think that's what it says. I think that's what it means. Gershon, page 379.
This situation pertained until they entered the land of Israel, which personified Rachel. This accords with our general understanding of the difference between life in the desert and life in the land of Israel. The former was an abstract, ethereal, disembodied sort of existence divorced from the realities of material life, while the latter was fully involved in the challenges of daily existence. Only when in the land of Israel did the Jews begin to truly express the Torah's divinity on earth. This was the coupling of Zeranpin as Israel with Nukba as Rachel.
Okay. So, oh, wait a minute. I don't know if we say it here or not. It might be in the next one. A very important line in 12. In Yaakov's, we said before that Abba only interacts with Ima, with Bina. He doesn't interact with the offspring. Here it comes out that the Gvura from Abba is going into Yaakov, kind of, sort of in a way bypassing Ima. And I think that's explained further a little more in the next paragraph. Bina is associated with Olam Haba. Are we here? No. Go ahead, Gershon. Next paragraph. In the generation.
In the generation of the desert, there was only a coupling between Yaakov and its Nukba that issued together with it from the states of Gevura that it took from Abba. This Nukba was embodied by the generation of the desert. In a sense, the coupling that occurred when the Jews were in the desert was on a higher level. The prevailing consciousness was derived directly from Abba, the pristine divine insight.
Whoa. So usually the emotions get from Ima, as we explained at the beginning. Here, Ima was bypassed, and Yaakov received his Gevuros directly from Chachma. Chachma is higher than Bina. So he was able to bypass and receive directly from Abba. How that works, again, I don't know. But this is what's happening here. Now, and it's not the norm, it's not the way the world was meant to be. Just as we weren't meant to live in the desert, like we said near the top of the page, living in the desert surrounded by tents with a well from Miriam. We don't have to work to get water. We have man, our food, falling down every day from heaven that we don't have to work at. We don't have to plow, plant, hitch up the animals to the plow or to the farm instrument, and so on, and water, harvest, and all the other labors involved in preparing food. Everything was prepared for us. It's wonderful. Life was great, but that's not how the world was meant to be. Bina is associated, and here's a little sidebar. Bina is associated with Olam Haba, the world to come, the reward for the soul after the person passes away. Why would it be associated with Bina? Olam Haba is associated with Bina. I just said that. Bina embodies the pleasure associated with study and comprehension. Oh, now I get it. You know that feeling? Oh, now I get it, right? So it's very, it brings pleasure, satisfaction. Just as Olam Haba is the pleasure of the soul for the mitzvot, which it fulfilled. So the Mishnah says, I just learned this either last night or last week, that the generation of the desert does not have a share in Olam Haba for their sins. The Arizal understands the statement differently. It means they did not receive chesed or gvura from Ima. They don't have a share in Olam Haba, meaning they bypassed Ima. They received their gvura directly from Abba. Okay, go ahead, Gershon. This is why.
This is why the sages stated that the generation of the desert has no portion in the world to come, which is Bina. Bina is referred to the world to come because it's always coming, that is, always entering and spreading throughout Zeir Anpin.
Continue.
The generation of the desert have no portion in it because they derive from the states of Gevura within Abba, and they have no portion in Ima at all. In general, the statement that the generation of the desert has no portion in the world to come is understood denigratingly, meaning that their sin was so great that they are excluded from the messianic redemption. Here, it is understood almost as praise. They have no portion in the world to come because they are, in essence, higher than the world to come. The world to come, or afterlife, is described as the delight the soul experiences in its enhanced experience and comprehension of divinity, a manifestation of Bina. Since the generation of the desert is rooted in Chokhmah, their experience of divinity transcends that of Bina. The Hebrew for world to come, Olam Haba, literally means the world, the coming world, and the verbal coming can thus be understood as present progressive, continuously coming. Bina / Ima is what is constantly coming and flowing into Zeir Anpin to mature the emotions and revitalize them.
Okay, thanks. Okay. As
This
we
should be
know,
taught. Sorry.
Here, I'm sorry.
I was just saying this should be taught. You know? This should be taught widely.
it's not simple.
It's not simple, but it helps you really understand the basic parsha. That their nukva came straight out of Abba. They cheated. They had super cheating. And it's not that they were evil. They just didn't have the same dynamic that we have.
It teaches us about the spies, that they wanted to stay there.
Same idea.
Who wouldn't want to stay there?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. And I just want to say, it's for me to prepare it. It's I'm really laboring on this in order to what I hope reorganizes the material and presents in a way that's hopefully much easier to follow. As we know, after the sin of the spies, Hashem decreed that men between the ages of 20 and 60 would die in the desert and not make it into Israel. These people were at the level of Yaakov, the male of Nukva, and Leah, the female of Zeir Anpin. The next generation, the people who left, it reminds me of, like, people who are upside down. Their nose runs and their feet smell. That's kind of what it reminds me of. The next generation, the people who left Egypt younger than 20, were the ones to enter Israel. They were at the level of Yisrael, the male of Zeir Anpin. They are following the hierarchy. They're following the right process. Okay, go ahead. Bottom of 379, Avigail.
Thus, the Jewish people at the time of the giving of the Torah comprised two groups, Yaakov and his Nukva, those that would die in the desert and not enter the land, plus their children who would enter the land and were derived from Yisrael. The generation of the desert was the Yaakov Leah generation, and their children were the Yisrael Rochel generation.
Yeah, and I do want to add that if I remember correctly, there are different opinions in the Gemara of the generation of the desert, if they will earn Olam Haba or not. I think Rabbi Kiva says they're not, and they say, Rabbi Kiva, that's not, you're not your usual self. You're usually
Right.
looking everything in the positive light. And then other rabbis, I forgot, who disagree and say that the generation of the desert will indeed have a share in the world to come.
So they're like the Sadiqim, they're saints, they're Sadiqim, that they didn't have to be the Baal Tshuva, they didn't have to fight the battle.
Well,
Yeah.
but in Hasidus, it also explains how their mentality, their personality mentality was fit for the desert and wouldn't adapt for the land of Israel.
They stayed in Crown Heights, right?
Why are you saying that?
Because they didn't go out into the world and bring it into the world and deal with everything in the world. They
Okay,
stayed
so I'm
in
just
that
want to.
beautiful place.
I was trying to remember where it was. If we said this last week, I was at a different gathering last week. It was probably Tuesday night after here, and I was at a gathering, and someone said that I guess years ago, he heard people talking Crown Heights, that you can only live this lifestyle and be on this level in Crown Heights. If you leave Crown Heights, you're gone. You're a goner.
Uh-huh.
And the guy was repeating it. He said, "How would I have become from if not for the people who didn't stay in Crown Heights?" So it's pretty funny. It's exactly what you're saying. You want to say something?
I was just gonna say, I'm curious, how old was Yeshua when they left Mitzrayim?
How old was Yeshua? That's an excellent question. He addresses it. He mentions it in the book. I think he said I don't remember what it was. I could be 40 years old when they left Egypt. And he died at 110. Two people. Yehoshua survived, and his partner, his colleague.
Caleb, yeah.
Caleb, correct. Okay. So they were at the level of Yisrael. You read that. 16. We began this chapter with a statement from Hashem to Moshe, "Thus shall you say to the house of Yaakov and declare to the children of Israel." Hashem addressed both groups.
Huh.
He addressed the group called Yaakov, who receives directly from Abba. And he addressed the group called Yisrael, who receives from Ima. Hashem used say with Yaakov, meaning that Yaakov should receive from Ima too. Yaakov, we said, the generation of the desert that received directly from Abba. So Hashem says to him, Ko Somar Lebeis Yaakov, or El Beis Yaakov. So you should say to the house of Yaakov. When we said that, the word Amar, say, means gentle speech. It matches the feminine persona. Never used that word before in a sentence. The word Amar, say, matches the feminine persona. And so Hashem is telling Yaakov, with the group of Yaakov, who derives their energy, nourishment directly from Abba, you guys got to get some Bina in you. You have to also relate to Ima and Bina. We got to cross lines over here.
So you're saying that the use of the word say, that feminine way of communication, is to say to this group, you have to get more in touch with Bina and what's happening.
In this case, usually the word say is a softer manner of speech than the word daber.
Right.
Speak. Say and speak. And that is in Chumash, it's in Rashi.
Everywhere.
It's
Yeah.
not in Kabbalah. Here, over here for the men, he said use the word tagad. And Taged, as I mentioned, it's not Omar, it's not Daber, but it's the word Gidin, which is a bitter root. I think it's wormwood, or it's something worse than wormwood. If you hang on, we'll do a little research. Okay, go ahead, Abigail. God wanted
them both to elicit revelations from these two aspects of divine light that we mentioned, that is, from both Abba and from Ima. He therefore said to them, thus you shall say, using the idiom of saying, which applies to Ima, to the house of Yaakov, who is derived solely from Abba. For the secondary parts of Yaakov, as we said, is derived directly from Abba.
continue.
He wanted this group to draw down upon themselves light from Ima as well and receive his saying, i.e. Ima.
In an ideal situation, Ima sends to Zeir Anpin, in this case known as Yisrael. Hashem said to declare, Taged, which refers to the male component of Chachma, to B'nai Yisrael into Zeir Anpin. We said before that the group, the children who were on their way into Israel, they're called Yisrael. And that is the male component. He says, you have to get in touch with Taged, with declare, with the male component called Chachma. Just like he told the Yaakov that they have to get in touch with Ima, he told the male component Israel, they also have to receive from Chachma, from the male component. Yisrael should not just receive from Ima, which is the normal, we said that's the normal hierarchy, they should receive from Abba as well. Go ahead. Hashem then said.
God then said, and declare, which can also mean drawing down, referring to the Yesod of Abba, which is manifest below, and Yesod of Zeir Anpin via the Yesod of Ima. To the Israelites refers to those from Zeir Anpin who are derived from Ima and not from Abba. God said, I want these to draw down some light of Abba upon themselves too. The Hebrew root for to declare, Nun Gimel Dalet, also produces the meanings to be opposite in the sense of to be present in front of, which in turn is the causative Hifil, gives in the causative Hifil, gives the meaning to make present or to draw down. Inasmuch as Yesod of Ima is readily accessible to Zeir Anpin, what needs to be drawn down is Yesod of Abba. Thus, this verb refers to that level. To the Israelites here is understood to mean to those who derive from the secondary parts of Israel, i.e. the generation that entered the land. The Arizal will now show a similar allusion in a passage from Moshe's.
We're going to stop here.
Okay.
We're going to stop here. Okay. So we got to cross wires. That's the message. Here we got
crazy new Torah here, huh?
New ideas.
Totally different. And super full. It seems like it's saying, I want everybody to have the whole, all of me, everything.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting about 1 minute. How he shows the difference in Yaakov and Yisrael, and that this is, and then he's going to bring other psukim that also talk about Yaakov, and they also have Yaakov and Yisrael, and he's going to show the same idea there as well. The difference between them. The other thing I want to mention is that, this idea of Gidin, that it says, I told you wormwood, it could be that it translates as, I forgot, as absinthe or something.
Absinthe.
Absinthe.
Is that an alcohol?
Absinthe. It's a psychedelic alcohol.
It's actually illegal, from what I understand.
Absinthe.
And it could be it's made from wormwood.
It is. It has wormwood.
Brand of absinthe.
It's absinthe. and it does have wormwood in it. It's a psychedelic.
Uh-huh,
It's like-
okay.
It's like mescaline in a way,
Wow.
All right. So we'll,
like mushrooms.
It's a very interesting Torah.
magic mushrooms.
It the generation that stays in the desert gets a bum rap.
Even better. Moshe stayed with them.
Yeah,
If Moshe would have left them, they'd be lost.
And he
Yeah.
made that choice, right? Because Hashem said, ask again and I'll let you go in.
He,
And he did-
Moshe made that choice that he was going to stay with them so that they would be redeemed.
yeah. Well, he was the leader.
Yeah,
Yeah.
He stayed with his people.
Yep.
Okay?
good,
One
good,
moment, 46.
crazy.
Get in a type of bitter herb. Targum translates as wormwood. Others, yeah. Okay, wormwood is best. All right, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good night. Next Tuesday should be fine. No,
No?
yes, next Tuesday should be fine. I'm sorry. In 2 weeks. No class the day after Labor Day, unless we want to do Monday night Labor Day. Think about it. We'll talk. Possibly
I-
Wednesday.
And
Night.
next week, time-wise, are we in the same time quadrant as tonight?
Next week, we're gonna try to do a little earlier than 8.
Okay, that would be good.
We'll
Okay.
try like maybe 7:50-ish. I'll have to look what time Mincha is.
All right.
Okay, good night all.
Thank-
Good
Good night, all.
night.